The forest exhaled a damp, pine-scented breath, cloaking the night in a haze that clung to my skin like a lover's whisper. My wrists chafed under coarse rope, the bite of it grounding me as I stumbled through the underbrush, herded by warriors whose eyes gleamed with lupine hunger. The Pacific Northwest's wilderness stretched endless around us, its shadows swallowing the cries of my fallen pack. Hours ago I'd been free, running under the moon with my kin. Now I was a prize, dragged toward the stronghold of Alpha Kael, the man who'd raised my world. My heart thudded, not from fear but from a defiance I buried deep. I'd seen Kael from afar during the battle, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair catching the moonlight like raven wings, his presence a storm that commanded surrender. His pack called him ruthless, a king forged in betrayal and blood. Yet something in his gaze, a flicker of pain, had snagged my attention, even as our defenses crumbled.
"Move it, sweetheart,"
growled a warrior, shoving me forward. My bare feet caught on a root, and I bit back a curse. My flannel shirt torn at the sleeve, exposing the curve of my shoulder to the chilly air. I straightened, hazel eyes flashing, and met the warrior's stare. He faltered, sensing the fire I kept hidden beneath my dirt-streaked face. The stronghold loomed ahead, a fortress of stone and timber nestled against a cliff, its windows glowing like predatory eyes. The gates creaked open and my pulse quickened as I was pushed into a courtyard alive with the scents of wood smoke and musk. Wolves, some in human form, others pacing as beasts, watched me, their curiosity a tangible weight. I kept my chin high, my chestnut hair falling in wild waves down my back, refusing to cower. Then I saw him. Alpha Kael stood at the courtyard's center, and the air around him felt different, thicker, charged. He was taller than I'd realized, his frame lean but muscled, clad in a black leather jacket that hugged his shoulders. His jaw was sharp, shadowed with stubble, and his eyes, storm gray and piercing, locked onto mine. A shiver danced down my spine, not from the cold, but from the way his gaze seemed to peel back my defenses, searching for something I didn't yet understand.
"Bring her forward,"
Kael said, his voice low, a velvet growl that sent heat curling through me despite myself. The warrior nudged me, and I stepped closer, my bare toes curling against the cobblestones. Up close, Kael smelled of cedar and midnight, a scent that stirred something primal in my blood. I fought the urge to lean into it, to let it wrap around me like a promise.
"Who are you?"
he asked, his tone deceptively soft, like a predator toying with prey. His eyes roamed my face, lingering on the freckles dusting my cheeks, the defiant tilt of my lips. "Arya," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "Just a survivor of your war." His lips twitched, not quite a smile but something darker, hungrier.
"Just a survivor,"
he echoed, stepping closer. The space between us crackled, and I felt the warmth of his breath against my skin, a dangerous intimacy that made my pulse race.
"You don't look like just anything, Starlight."
The pet name hit like a caress, soft and possessive, igniting a spark low in my belly. I wanted to snap back, to tell him I wasn't his to name, but my body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly toward him. His eyes darkened, as if he felt it too, the pull, the unspoken thread tying us together. For a moment, the courtyard faded, and it was just us, caught in a dance of heat and shadow.
"Chain her with the others,"
Kael said abruptly, turning away, his voice rougher now, like he was fighting something inside. The spell broke, and my cheeks burned as the warrior grabbed my arm, dragging me toward a stone building. I glanced back, catching Kael's silhouette against the moon, his fists clenched, his gaze still on me. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of straw and despair. Other captives, women and men from my pack, huddled in the dim light, their eyes hollow. I was shoved into a corner, iron cuffs snapping around my wrists. The metal was cold, but it couldn't douse the fire Kael's presence had kindled. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath uneven, replaying the way he'd looked at me, the way starlight had felt on his lips. I didn't know what this pull was, this ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. But as the moon climbed higher, casting silver through the barred window, I swore I'd survive this. Not just to escape, but to unravel the mystery of the man who'd claimed me with a single word, and the part of me that wanted to claim him back. The days blurred into a haze of labor and pain. We scrubbed floors, hauled wood, and served the pack's warriors, their leers a constant reminder of our place. But it was Kael's presence that haunted me. He'd pass by, his gaze lingering, and every time my mark tingled, a soft heat spreading through my chest. I hated how my body responded, how my breath caught when he called me Starlight, in that low velvet drawl. One evening, as I carried a tray of ale to the great hall, a warrior grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin.
Pretty thing like you shouldn't be wasting away.
He slurred, his breath sour. Panic spiked, but before I could react, Kael was there, his hand clamping around the guy's wrist. The crack of bone echoed, and the warrior yelped, crumpling.
Touch her again, and you're dead.
Kael said, his voice deadly calm. His eyes flicked to me, and my pulse raced, not from fear but from the intensity in his stare. He stepped closer, his heat brushing my skin, and my lips parted, the air between us crackling.
You okay, Starlight?
He murmured, his fingers grazing my arm where the warrior had grabbed me. His touch was fire, sending shivers down my spine, and I nodded, unable to speak. He lingered, his thumb tracing a slow circle, and I felt it, desire sharp and dangerous, coiling low in my belly. That night, in the slave quarters, I met Nora, a wiry girl with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue.
You've got his attention.
She whispered, passing me a crust of bread.
Be careful. Kael's not just an alpha, he's a storm, and he'll break you if you let him.
I wanted to laugh. Break me? I'd survived too much for that. But as I lay on my pallet, the memory of Kael's touch burned through me. I imagined his hands, rough and sure, sliding over my skin, his lips whispering.
Starlight.
Against my throat. My fingers drifted to my mark, the heat pulsing in time with my racing heart, and I bit my lip, ashamed of the ache between my thighs. Sleep didn't come easy. Kael was my captor, but he was also something else, something my body recognized even if my mind screamed to resist, and that scared me more than any chain ever could. The pack's hierarchy was a brutal dance, and I was learning the steps. Nora taught me to keep my head down but my ears open, and I listened, catching whispers of a rival pack circling like vultures. My mark burned hotter each day, especially when Kael was near, and I started to wonder if it was more than a scar. If it was a power I didn't understand. One night during a pack feast, a young wolf cub darted into the path of a drunken warrior's fist. Without thinking, I dropped my tray and scooped the kid up, shielding him with my body. The hall went silent, and I felt Kael's eyes on me, heavy as a touch. The warrior sneered, raising his hand again, but Kael's growl stopped him cold.
Enough.
Kael said, striding over. He knelt beside me, his hand brushing mine as he checked the cub.
You're quick, Starlight.
He said softly, his voice wrapping around me like silk. My breath hitched, and when his fingers lingered on my wrist, a spark shot through me, my mark flaring with heat. Later, in the shadows of the hall, he cornered me.
Why'd you risk yourself for that kid?
He asked, his body close, his scent overwhelming, pine and smoke pulling me under. I tilted my chin, meeting his gaze. Because no one else would, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my limbs. His eyes darkened and he stepped closer, his chest brushing mine. The air thickened, charged with something primal, and my skin flushed, every nerve alive.
You're not like the others.
he murmured, his hand cupping my jaw. His thumb traced my lower lip and I gasped, the sensation electric. My body leaned into him, craving more, but fear snapped me back. I pulled away, heart pounding, and fled to the slave quarters, his touch still burning on my skin. That night, I dreamed of him, of Kael, his hands charting every inch of my skin, like he already knew the map by heart. His mouth found mine in the dark, slow and searching, like he was starving for something only I could give. I woke with a gasp, my chest rising like I'd run a mile. The mark on my neck pulsed faintly, warm, alive, as if it remembered him too. And in that moment, I knew I was in deeper than I thought. Kael wasn't just the one holding me here. He was the fire under my skin, the ache I couldn't soothe. Nora became my anchor, her sharp wit cutting through the fog of my confusion. She noticed the way Kael watched me, the way my mark flared when he was near, and one night she pulled me aside.
That mon ain't normal, Arya.
She said, her voice low.
You're hiding something and so's he.
She was right. The mark was tied to my bloodline, a secret my mom had died to protect. I'd always felt its power, but now, with Kael's presence, it was waking up, a restless energy that hummed beneath my skin. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I had to keep it hidden. Kael started pulling me into his orbit, assigning me tasks near him, polishing his weapons, serving his meals. His proximity was torture, his casual touches igniting sparks that left me dizzy. One afternoon, as I cleaned his study, he caught my wrist, his grip firm but gentle.
Stop running from me, Starlight.
He said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped closer, his body a wall of heat, and my mark burned, a sweet ache spreading through me. His fingers slid up my arm, slow, deliberate, and I shivered, my lips parting.
You feel it, don't you?
He whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I did. God, I did. His touch was a current pulling me under, and when his lips brushed my temple, soft as a sigh, I melted, my hands gripping his shirt. My lips parted for him, instinctive, aching, and he took it. His tongue met mine in a slow, desperate dance, full of hunger and heat, like he'd been holding back for far too long. The world narrowed to his scent, his heat, the steady thrum of his heart, but then reality crashed in, chains, slavery, betrayal, and I pushed him away, gasping. I can't, I choked out, fleeing before I could drown in him. That night, alone, I touched the mark, its glow pulsing in time with my racing pulse. I imagined his hands, his mouth, claiming every inch of me, and the ache was unbearable. Kael was dangerous, but he was also inevitable, and I wasn't sure how long I could resist. The truth hit me like a freight train. Kael was my fated mate. My mark, the pull, the way my body sang for him, it all made sense, and it terrified me. He was my captor, the alpha who'd enslaved me, yet every touch, every glance wove us tighter together. I fought it, but the bond was relentless, a tide I couldn't outrun. One night, after overhearing a plot against the pack, I slipped a warning under Kael's door, my heart pounding. He found me the next day, his eyes blazing.
You saved us.
He said, pulling me into a secluded alcove. His hands framed my face, and the air between us crackled, thick with need.
Tell me you don't feel this.
He growled, his lips inches from mine. My mark flared, heat pooling low, and I couldn't lie. His mouth claimed mine, slow at first, then hungry, his tongue teasing mine with a rhythm that set me ablaze. His hands slid down my back, pulling me flush against him, and I moaned, feeling his hardness, his need matching mine. Every sensation was vivid, his calloused fingers grazing my spine, the scrape of his stubble, the pine and smoke scent filling my lungs. My hands tangled in his hair, and I arched into him, lost in the fire of his kiss. But fear surged and I broke away, panting, my lips swollen, my body screaming for more. "I'm your slave," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. His face softened and he cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear.
Not to me, Starlight.
He said, his voice raw.
Never to me.
I ran, but his words echoed, unraveling my defenses. That night I lay awake, my body alive with the memory of his kiss, my mark glowing like a beacon. The mate bond was a chain of its own, but God help me, I wanted to surrender. I avoided him for days, ducking into shadows whenever his scent, pine, smoke, and wildness drifted too close. I'd started going in before dawn, before he could catch me. I'd wipe down his weapons, dust the old books, place his meals on the side table, then disappear. But the mate bond didn't care about my pride or my fear. It pulsed through me relentless, my mark glowing hotter each night, a beacon I couldn't hide. Nora noticed. She cornered me in the slave quarters, her eyes sharp as she handed me a stolen apple.
"You glowing like a firefly, Arya. That marks travel, and so's Kael. Spill it."
I hesitated, biting into the apple's tart flesh. Nora was the closest thing I had to a friend, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Still, the weight of my secret was crushing me. "It's a mark from my bloodline," I admitted, voice low. "It's waking up and I don't know why." She leaned closer, her breath warm.
"Because of him, right? Kael's stirring something in you. Be careful. Power like that gets noticed."
Her words haunted me as I worked, scrubbing floors until my hands bled. It was early morning. I was kneeling in Kael's study, polishing the steel of his daggers, the scent of oil and cold iron clinging to my hands. Kael's voice cut through the silence like a blade.
Arya.
I froze, rag clenched tight in my fingers. My pulse throbbed at the base of my throat. I didn't turn.
I asked the cook who brought up my dinner.
He said,
They told me you'd been sending others.
"I've been busy," I said, voice low. He took a step closer. I heard the boots on the wooden floor. Slow, heavy, measured, like he was giving me time to bolt.
Busy or running?
He echoed. My hand stilled on the blade. I could feel the heat of him behind me, even though he wasn't touching me. That made it worse. How much space he took up just by standing still. "I can't do this," I whispered, standing slowly. My fingers were slick with oil and nerves, my eyes meeting his chest before I had the courage to drag them upward. His brow furrowed, like he was waiting for the rest, like he needed the words to matter more than the memory.
You saved my pack.
He finally said. His voice was deep, rough, but quiet, like it was meant just for me. "That doesn't mean I belong to you," I shot back. He stepped closer, the heat of him brushing my skin. I backed up instinctively, the edge of the table catching the backs of my thighs. He didn't stop. Just kept coming until he was right there, close enough to steal my breath. His hands braced on the table, one on each side, boxing me in without laying a single finger on me.
You're no slave, Arya.
He said, voice low, mouth inches from mine.
You're something else.
My heart slammed against my ribs. His words were raw, rough. I wanted to believe him, part of me did, but another part, the part still covered in fear, knew better. I pulled back, breathing hard. My fingers brushed the table's edge, anchoring me. And I ran, out of his chambers. Down the hall, my steps too loud, too fast. I didn't stop until the cold air of night slapped my face. But even out there under the stars, I could still feel his hands on my skin. And worse, I could still feel the part of me that didn't want to let go. The pack was buzzing with tension, whispers of a rival alpha sniffing around our borders. I caught fragments of it while cleaning the floor, my ears sharp despite the ache in my bones. My mark was restless, flaring whenever Kael was near, and I knew I couldn't keep running. Not from him. Not from whatever I was becoming. Nora dragged me to a hidden clearing one night, her eyes glinting with mischief.
Let's see what that mark can do.
She tossed me a stick, mimicking a sword, and we sparred, my muscles remembering moves my dad taught me before the world burned. I moved faster than I should have, my strikes precise, and Nora grinned, dodging.
Damn, girl, you a natural.
Mid-swing, Kael's scent hit me, and I faltered. He stepped from the shadows, his eyes locked on me, intense and unreadable.
Keep going.
He said, voice rough. Nora smirked and slipped away, leaving us alone under the stars.
You're holding back.
He said, circling me, his presence a physical weight. He grabbed a stick, testing me, and we sparred, wood clacking in the quiet. His strength was overwhelming, but I matched him, my mark pulsing, fueling me. He lunged, pinning me against a tree, his body flush against mine, and my breath caught, desire roaring through me.
You're strong, Starlight.
He growled, his lips hovering over mine. His hand slid down my arm, fingers intertwining with mine, and the world narrowed to his touch. His heat.
Stop hiding it.
The memory of chains snapped me back. I pushed him away, trembling. I'm not your weapon, I said, voice raw. His eyes softened just for a second, but before he could speak, I turned and ran, the heat of his nearness still burning through my skin. I didn't look back, but I could feel him watching me, his stare like a weight pressing between my shoulder blades. That night, my mark glowed brighter and I felt it, power coiled and waiting. Kael saw it, and that terrified me more than any rival pack. I couldn't shake Kael's touch, the way his kiss had unraveled me. My mark was a live wire now, sparking with every thought of him, and I hated how much I craved him. Nora kept pushing me to train, to embrace whatever power was waking inside me, but I was scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of losing myself to Kael's pull. One night, I overheard a plot to ambush Kael's patrol. My warning had saved them before, but this felt bigger, darker. The wind outside howled like it knew what I'd done. I shouldn't be here, I knew that. But my feet had a mind of their own, carrying me through the stone halls like I wasn't the same girl who'd spent the last week avoiding Kael, like the scent of him might burn me alive. Maybe it already had. The folded note trembled in my hand. Just 5 words, enough to shift the course of everything. They plan to ambush you. My breath fogged against the cold metal of the dagger. I slipped it under, the same blade I'd polished a dozen times without ever daring to touch the hilt. It was always warm, like him. Always sharp, too, like the memory of his mouth on mine. I turned to leave, heart in my throat, and stopped dead. He was there, leaning against the doorway like he hadn't just caught me in the act. His arms crossed, chest rising slow beneath a black linen shirt unlaced at the collar. There was a streak of dried blood across his jaw, someone else's, not his. And his eyes were wildfire.
You again.
Kael said, voice a low scrape across the silence.
Why, Starlight? Why risk yourself?
My pulse throbbed in my throat. The mark on my side burned, flaring beneath my clothes, like it recognized him faster than I could admit I ever had. My voice cracked. I can't let you die. It came out too fast, too raw, like it had been hiding behind my ribs this whole time, just waiting to break free. His expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, something heavier, sadder.
Then why do you keep running, Arya?
I swallowed hard, but the lump in my throat didn't budge. His scent was all around me. Earth after rain, smoke and pine like a storm was about to hit. And I was the lightning rod. I looked away, toward the fire flickering low in the corner of his study. Anything but him. I don't know how to stay, I whispered. He stepped forward. One step. Then another. I backed up on instinct, my spine pressing into the wall, my breath hitched as he stopped a breath away, his shadow swallowing mine. He didn't touch me, but I could feel him everywhere, like the space between us had its own gravity.
You saved me.
He said, quieter now, like it cost him something to admit it.
Twice.
His eyes searched mine, slow, unrelenting.
I would have known it was you. Eventually, your scent stitched into my skin, just like mine is in you.
His fingers twitched like he wanted to reach out. Instead, he stepped back. That single step nearly broke me. Kael turned his back and walked to the desk, lifting the dagger with the note beneath it. He didn't read it. He just held it between his fingers like it mattered because I'd touched it.
I'll pull patrols from the west side.
He muttered, more to himself than me.
Set a trap at the ridge.
The shift in him, commander again, alpha again, should have made it easier to run. But it didn't. I backed out of the room without a word, the echo of my own heartbeat chasing me down the corridor. By the time I reached my room, I was shaking. I slammed the door and sagged against it, fists clenched at my sides. My chest rose and fell too fast. The mark on my side glowed, angry and wanting. I dropped onto the mattress like the ground might split beneath me. My whole body was on fire. Every inch of me missed his touch. Every part of me screamed not to go back. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there, wide awake, caught between a battle brewing outside these walls and the one raging inside me. Because I couldn't let Kael die. But I couldn't let myself love him either. The great hall's fire had burned low, its embers casting a faint amber glow across the log walls, leaving shadows to dance like ghosts. I'd stood by a heavy oak table, wiping it down with a damp rag, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and stale ale. Outside, Willow Creek's night had settled over Montana, the wind howling through the pines, sharp and mournful, like it knew my heart. My gray sweater had clung to me, frayed at the cuffs, and my dark hair had hung loose, brushing my shoulders. The scar on my hip had throbbed, a quiet pulse that hadn't let me rest, like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I'd been in Kael's compound for weeks, each day a balancing act between survival and the strange pull in my chest, the one tied to him. It had grown stronger, a thread that tightened when he was near, whispering I was more than a slave. The hall had been empty, the pack long gone to their beds, but I'd stayed, too restless to sleep. My hands had moved on autopilot, scrubbing at a stain, when the memory hit sharp and unbidden, like a blade slipping through my ribs. I'd frozen, the rag slipping from my fingers as the past pulled me under. It had been a warm summer night, the air heavy with jasmine and the buzz of crickets. Our packed camp had sprawled across a meadow in Idaho, tents and cabins tucked among wildflowers, the Bitterroot Mountains looming dark against the stars. I'd been 19, laughing with my brother Caleb by the bonfire. His hazel eyes, so like mine, had sparkled as he'd teased me about the mark on my hips.
You sure that mark isn't just a fancy birthmark? Maybe the moon goddess ran out of ink when she got to you.
He'd said, ruffling my hair. I'd swatted him, grinning, my heart light. Mom had been there, her dark braid swinging as she'd stirred a pot of stew, her voice soft.
No, Caleb's, the mark is not just a fancy birthmark. It's a gift,
she said, turning to both of us. Dad had sat nearby, sharpening his knife, his weathered face creased with a rare smile. We'd been small, maybe 30 wolves, but tight-knit, our bonds forged in shared hunts and quiet nights. I'd felt safe. Then Tessa had come. She'd been one of us, a wiry she-wolf with sharp green eyes and a quick laugh, She'd joined a year earlier, claiming she'd fled a cruel alpha. We'd taken her in, trusted her. That night she'd sat by the fire, her fingers twisting a blade of grass, her smile too tight. I'd noticed, but I'd brushed it off, too caught in the warmth of family. I hadn't seen the signal she'd given, a subtle flick of her wrist, a glint of metal catching the firelight. But I'd heard the howls, sudden and savage as Kael's pack had descended. The air had turned to chaos, screams, snarls, the wet snap of bones. Mom had shoved me toward the trees, voice hoarse.
Arya, run.
I'd stumbled, my heart pounding, and looked back to see Tessa standing calm, her eyes cold as she'd pointed out my mother to Kael's wolves. Dad had fought, his gray fur matted with blood, but they'd overwhelmed him. Mom's scream had cut off, sharp and final. Caleb had lunged for Tessa, but a blade had caught him and he'd fallen, his eyes finding mine wide with pain. I'd run, tears blinding me, the forest swallowing me as my pack died. Tessa's betrayal had burned hotter than the grief, a poison that had festered ever since. I gasped back in the hall, my hands trembling as I gripped the table. The scar on my hip had burned, sharp and alive, and I'd fought the tears stinging my eyes. That's when I'd heard him, Kael. His footsteps had been slow, deliberate, his scent hitting me like a wave. Cedar, leather, and that wild edge of rain-soaked earth. He'd stopped behind me, close enough that I'd felt the heat of him, and my pulse had stuttered.
You're shaking.
He'd said, his voice low, rough with concern, like he'd been carrying the weight of the pack all day. I hadn't turned, afraid he'd see the rawness in my eyes, but he'd stepped closer, his presence a quiet storm. Just tired, I'd lied, my voice cracking. I'd stared at the table, tracing its grain, but the memory of Tessa's cold smile had clung, fueling the distrust that kept me walled off. He'd moved to my side, leaning against the table, his flannel shirt stretched over broad shoulders, sleeves rolled to show the corded muscles of his forearms. His black hair had fallen over his eyes, gray as a winter sky, and there'd been a shadow of stubble on his jaw, making him look less like an alpha and more like a man worn by his own ghosts.
You don't have to lie to me, Starlight.
He'd said softly, his gaze heavy, searching.
What's got you like this?
I'd swallowed, my throat tight. The truth had pressed against my lips, heavy and sharp, and something in his eyes, steady, unguarded, had pulled it out. My pack, I'd whispered, voice barely there. They were betrayed. Someone we trusted. She sold us out. To you. His jaw had tightened, and I'd seen the flicker of guilt in his eyes, quickly buried. He'd nodded, slow, like he was piecing it together.
That's why you don't trust me.
He'd said, not a question. His voice had been soft, but it hit hard, stirring the ache in my chest. I'd nodded, tears threatening, and looked away, the fire's glow blurring. Everyone I loved, gone. Because of you. He'd reached out, hesitant, his fingers barely grazing mine. The touch was warm, rough with calluses, and it sent a shiver down my spine, quieting the storm raging in my chest.
I get it, Arya.
He said, voice low and steady, like he was anchoring us both.
But if it had been your dad, he would have done the same thing.
Maybe, I'd whispered, raw and uncertain. His hand had slid to my cheek, cradling it gently, and his touch had been a lifeline, grounding me. He'd stepped closer, his breath warm against my temple, and I'd caught the faint pine on him, the pulse at his throat. My body had hummed, alive with him, and I'd wanted to close the distance, to let his warmth chase away the ghosts. But the memory of Tessa had lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd pulled back, heart pounding, and he'd let me, his hand falling but his eyes holding mine, raw and patient.
I know you don't trust me. Maybe one day you will, Starlight.
he'd said, the nickname soft, intimate, like a promise. It had undone me, but I'd nodded, cheeks burning, and stepped away, the rag back in my hands. He'd watched me a moment, then turned, his boots echoing as he left. I'd stood there, the fire crackling, my scars still warm, knowing that pull, our bond was real, and it terrified me as much as it called me home. Starlight's shadow. Morning had crept over Willow Creek, the sky a heavy gray, promising snow that hung like a threat. I'd stood in the kitchen, chopping carrots, the knife's rhythm a shaky anchor against the storm in my head. The compound had buzzed with unease, rumors of a rival pack circling too close, and I'd felt it, sharp as the frost outside. My jeans were speckled with flour, my black tank clinging to my skin from the stove's heat, and I'd tied my dark hair back, strands sticking to my sweaty neck. The scar on my hip had pulsed, warm and restless, ever since Kael's touch last night, when he'd quieted my ghosts with a gentleness that scared me. Nora had been there, stirring a pot of stew, her braid swinging, her brown eyes flicking to me with a knowing edge.
You look like hell.
She'd said, voice low under the clatter of pans. Rough night, I'd muttered, keeping my eyes on the carrots. Kael's words, maybe one day you will trust me, had looped in my head, tangled with Tessa's betrayal, the memory of my pack's blood on her hands. My distrust had claws, and even Kael's warmth couldn't dull them completely. She'd snorted, tossing in a handful of herbs.
Kael's got you twisted up. Be careful, Arya.
I'd nodded, my knife slipping, nicking my finger. The sting had grounded me, but not enough. Kael was a wildfire, and I was too close to getting burned. Later, I'd been sent to deliver bread to the Elder's Lodge, a low building tucked behind the compound, its cedar walls weathered by Montana winters. The air had smelled of pine and damp earth, and I'd pulled my jacket tight, boots crunching on the gravel path. My breath had fogged, and I'd felt the scar's warmth, like it knew something I didn't. Inside, Elder Marcus had sat by a window, his silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light, his gnarled hands folded over a leather book. He'd looked at me, eyes sharp as a hawk's, and gestured to a chair.
Sit, girl.
He'd said, voice like old whiskey, warm but biting. I'd set the basket down, my stomach twisting, and perched on the seat's edge. Just dropping off bread, sir. He'd waved that off, his gaze piercing.
That mark on you, it's no accident. Old magic tied to a prophecy.
His words had landed heavy, and I'd touched my hip, the scar burning through my jeans. What prophecy? I'd asked, voice tight, Tessa's betrayal flashing in my mind. I'd trusted too easily once. I wouldn't again. Marcus leaned forward, his hands trembling faintly.
She-wolf marked by the crescent, born of a lost bloodline. She'll bind a fractured pack or tear it apart. The alpha's mate, hidden in plain sight.
His eyes had held mine, heavy with meaning.
Kael's starting to see it. He questions who you are.
I'd frozen, my heart pounding. The pull in my chest, the scar's heat, Kael's gazes, it all clicked and it terrified me. I'm nobody, I'd said, but my voice had cracked, weak against the truth. He'd smiled, sad and certain.
Odie doesn't carry that kind of power.
He'd dismissed me, but his words had clung, heavy as the clouds outside. Back at the compound, I'd caught sight of Kael in the courtyard, talking with a beta, his black coat open, his jaw tight. His dark hair had fallen over his eyes, and there'd been a tension in his shoulders like he was carrying the pack's weight alone. He'd sensed me, his head turning, and his gaze had locked on mine, a slow burn that stole my breath. He'd ended the conversation and walked over, his scent cedar leather, rain wrapping around me.
You look spooked.
He'd said, voice low, his gray eyes searching. His hands had flexed at his sides, and I'd noticed a new cut on his knuckles, fresh and raw. "Talk to Marcus," I'd admitted, my hands fidgeting with my jacket zipper. He said things. About a prophecy. About me. His jaw had clenched, and he'd stepped closer, his shadow warm.
"What did he tell you, Starlight?"
I'd hesitated, then spilled it. The prophecy, the mark, the mate bond. His eyes had darkened, and he'd taken my hand, his fingers warm and calloused, grounding me.
"You're not facing this alone."
He'd said, voice rough with something deep. His thumb had traced my palm, slow and steady, and I'd felt it everywhere. My skin, my scar, my heart. I'd wanted to lean into him, to let his strength hold me, but Tessa's face had flashed, her cold smile a warning. "I don't know if I can trust this," I'd whispered, voice breaking. He'd lifted my chin, his touch gentle, and I'd seen the man behind the alpha. Scarred, searching, maybe as scared as me.
"We'll figure it out."
He'd said, and for a moment I'd let myself believe him, even as distrust lingered like a shadow. Snow had fallen that night, soft and quiet, wrapping Willow Creek in a hush that felt like a held breath. I'd stood outside the compound, my breath clouding in the cold, my scarf, a faded blue thing, loose around my neck. My boots had been damp from chores, and my gray hoodie had smelled faintly of the kitchen's sage and grease. The scar on my hip had burned hotter since Marcus's words, like it was waking up, and I'd felt restless, like a caged wolf itching to run. I'd wandered to the training yard, the snow untouched, its glow catching the moonlight. My body had craved movement, so I'd started practicing moves my brother Caleb had taught me. Quick steps, low strikes, the kind that kept you alive. My muscles had warmed, my breath puffing white, and for a moment I'd felt free. The weight of Tessa's betrayal and Marcus's prophecy fading. Then I'd heard shouts, sharp, urgent, from the compound's edge. My heart had leaped, and I'd sprinted toward the sound, snow crunching underfoot. A skirmish had broken out near the gate, a handful of wolves testing our borders. Kael had been there, his black coat flapping, his movements fluid as he fought, all raw power and controlled fury. His betas had flanked him, but one of the wolves, a lean, snarling beast, had broken through, charging me. I'd frozen, instinct kicking in, and raised my arms to block. Then it had happened. A surge, wild and hot, had ripped through me, starting at my scar and bursting outward. The snow had swirled, glowing faintly, and a force had shoved the wolf back, slamming it into a tree with a crack. I'd gasped, stumbling, my hands trembling as the power faded, leaving me raw. Kael had turned, his eyes wide, his chest heaving.
"Arya."
He'd said, voice rough with shock, and he'd crossed the distance in 3 strides, catching me as my knees buckled. His hands had been steady, warm through my hoodie, and his scent, cedar, leather, sweat, had grounded me.
"You okay?"
He'd asked, his gaze searching, no trace of the cold alpha I'd first met. "I don't know," I'd whispered, clutching his coat, my scar still humming. The betas had stared, their eyes wary, but Kael had ignored them, his focus on me.
"That was you."
He'd said, awe in his voice, and he'd brushed a snowflake from my cheek, his touch soft, lingering.
"Starlight, you're something else."
The nickname had hit hard, open and unguarded, and I'd felt that thread pull taut, binding us. My cheeks had burned, and I'd looked away. Tessa's betrayal flashing. Trust had cost me everything once. But Kael's touch had been different, steady, and I'd leaned into it, just a fraction, letting his warmth chase the fear. He'd helped me stand, his hand lingering on my arm, and his eyes had softened, less hostility, more wonder.
"Stay close."
he whispered, voice low, and I'd nodded, heart racing. The betas had driven off the last wolf and Kael had walked me back to the compound, his presence a shield. Inside, I'd lain on my cot, the scar pulsing, his touch a quiet ache. I'd known then that whatever this power was, it tied me to him, and that scared me as much as it drew me in. The next day had been thick with tension, the compound humming with whispers of wolves' attack. I'd worked in the kitchen, scrubbing pots until my hands were raw, my gray hoodie stained with grease and smelling of onions. The air had carried the warmth of roasted meat, but it couldn't mask the unease, heavy as the snow outside. My scar had throbbed, a reminder of the power I'd unleashed, and Marcus's prophecy had weighed on me, stirring the distrust Tessa's betrayal had carved into my bones. Nora had found me at midday, her face tight, her braid frayed like she'd been tugging at it.
We gotta talk.
She'd said, pulling me to a corner by the pantry, her voice low and urgent.
I'm with a resistance group. We want those wolves gone, but Kael's too cautious. We need you, Arya.
I'd stared, my stomach twisting. Me? I'm nobody. Nora. She gripped my arm, her eyes fierce.
With power last night, everyone's talking. You could change things.
Her voice had softened, almost pleading.
You know what it's like to lose everything.
I'd pulled away, my scar burning, Tessa's cold smile flashing in my mind. The idea of fighting had sparked something, a flicker of the girl who'd run from her pack's ashes, but Kael's touch, his voice calling me Starlight, had sparked something else, something warmer, deeper. I need time, I'd said, voice shaky, my hands twisting in my hoodie. Nora had nodded, but her eyes had been hard, disappointed.
Don't wait too long.
That evening I'd served dinner in the hall, my nerves frayed like old rope. Kael had sat at the head table, his black shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his jaw tight as he listened to his betas. His eyes had tracked me, a quiet heat that made my hands tremble as I poured water. When I'd reached him, his fingers had grazed mine, deliberate, warm, and he'd leaned close, his breath tickling my ear.
Meet me later.
He'd whispered.
Barn.
I'd nodded, heart pounding, and spent the night distracted, his words burning brighter than my fear. After cleanup, I'd slipped out, the snow crunching under my boots, the barn looming dark against the starry sky. Inside it had smelled of hay and leather, warm from stacked bales. Kael had been there, leaning against a post, his coat open, his gray eyes soft but intense, like a storm holding its breath.
You came.
He'd said, stepping closer, and I'd caught the hitch in his voice, the vulnerability that made him real. You asked, I'd replied, voice soft, and he'd smiled, a rare, crooked smile that hit me hard. We'd sat on a blanket he'd spread, the hay rustling, and I'd felt the weight of Nora's words, the resistance, pressing against the pull of him. I don't know what I'm doing, I'd admitted, my hands fidgeting. There's people who want change. They want me to help. His eyes had darkened, but he'd nodded, like he'd suspected.
And what do you want, Starlight?
I'd looked at him, his face lit by the faint glow of a lantern, the scar on his jaw catching the light. I want to stop running, I'd whispered, voice breaking. He'd reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, warm and steady, and I'd leaned into him, my head on his shoulder. His arm had wrapped around me, his scent, cedar, leather, rain, grounding me.
We'll face it together.
He'd said, his lips brushing my temple, soft and slow. The touch had sent a shiver through me, and I'd turned, my lips finding his. The kiss had been tender, his mouth warm, tasting of mint and snow. His hands had slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I'd felt every detail, the roughness of his calluses through my hoodie, the heat of his breath, the pulse of his heart under my palm. My scar had burned alive with him, and I'd pressed closer, craving the connection, the safety of him. He pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against mine, his eyes wet with memory.
I have my past too, Starlight. It made me cruel to survive.
I looked up at him, his flannel shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the scarred edge of his collarbone. His black hair had fallen over his gray eyes, stormy and unguarded, and the stubble on his jaw had caught the lantern glow. He looked vulnerable. "Tell me," I'd encouraged, my heart pounding, needing to know the man beneath the scars. He swallowed, his jaw tight, and stared at the lantern's flame like it held his story.
I grew up on Oregon's coast, where redwoods touch the sea, waves crashing so loud they'd weave into your soul. My pack lived in cabins, salt air everywhere. Dad, Gideon, was alpha, big laugh, steady hand. Rowan, my best friend, was sharp, always scheming, kept me from getting too serious.
His voice had softened, but pain had crept in, and I'd leaned into him, my shoulder against his, aching for the home he described. "Sounds like family," I'd said, my voice soft, picturing Caleb's grin, Mom's lullabies, before Tessa's blade cut them down.
It was,
He'd said, his hand tightening on mine.
until Mara. She was fire. Red hair, hazel eyes, bold as hell. I loved her. Thought she'd be my mate.
His voice had roughened, and my scar had pulsed, feeling his hurt.
I was 21, young, blind. She said we could make the pack stronger, change things. I trusted her, gave her everything.
I nodded, Tessa's cold eyes flashing. "She betrayed you," I'd guessed, my voice barely there, the mate bond humming between us. He nodded, his eyes glistening, raw.
She wanted to rule, to be alpha female. Plotted with rogue wolves planning my dad's death, take over. Leaked our patrols. Rowan figured it out, warned me, but the rogues attacked. Rowan took a blade for me, died in my arms, blood on my hands.
His voice had cracked, and he'd trembled, his breath ragged.
Dad fought, defeated their leader. The leader died in the battlefield. But my dad,
He paused.
he was hurt bad. He took the blame, said it was his fault, and left. Exiled himself, to save my place as alpha. I had to execute Mara. Watched her eyes go dark, and it's haunted me ever since.
I gasped, tears spilling, the image too close. Caleb's fall, Tessa's betrayal. "Kael," I'd whispered, my hand cupping his cheek, feeling the warmth. "You didn't see it coming." He shook his head, voice raw, eyes locked on mine.
I should have. I loved her, let her blind me. Lost Rowan, Dad, my heart. I built this pack back, but I had to be cold, cruel, to keep it safe.
He said, his gaze softening, fierce and vulnerable.
Then I saw you, Starlight, that first day in chains. Something stirred, deep, like my soul knew you weren't ordinary. I knew you were mine, and it scared the hell out of me.
His words crashed through me, shattering my walls, and I trembled, the mate bond singing in my blood, a melody only we could hear. "Kael," I said, my voice breaking, and he moved, swift and sure, pinning me to the bed, the blanket falling away like a shed skin. His body pressed against mine, warm and solid, his hands framing my face, eyes dark with love and need, the lantern casting his shadow over me. He kissed me, deep and desperate, his lips tasting of whiskey and salt, a fire that burned away my doubts, my fears. I melted, unable to resist, my hands tangling in his hair, the kiss a wildfire consuming me. Fierce and tender. His mouth moved with mine, soft then hungry, and I felt every sensation. The heat of his breath, the roughness of his stubble, the pulse of his heart under my fingers. My mark flared, alive with him, a crescent of heat binding us, and I clung to him, not breaking the kiss, letting it weave us together like the waves he described. He pulled back, breathless, his eyes searching, the lantern's glow catching the storm in them.
Say you love me, Starlight.
He said, his voice a low growl, his hands trailing down my collarbone, slow and warm, sending shivers through me, his fingers grazing lower, teasing the edge of my hoodie, a promise in their touch. I love you, I said, my voice trembling, the words a vow I hadn't known I'd make. He dipped his head, his lips finding the crook of my neck, warm and tender, a soft kiss that made me arch, my breath catching. His hands caught the fabric of my hoodie, tearing it gently at the shoulder, sliding it down my belly, leaving my skin bare to his gaze, the lantern's light painting me in gold. I felt exposed, alive, and my hands moved to his shirt, fumbling with the buttons, opening it to reveal the scarred planes of his chest, a map of his pain. I kissed him there, my lips grazing a scar, and he groaned, a low, raw sound that sent heat pooling in my core, a tide rising. He moved closer, his body warm and heavy as he pushed against me, and I gasped, whispering his name like a prayer, my head spinning with the force of him. His movements grew frantic, his hands gripping my hips, pulling me against him, and I arched, lost in the rhythm of his touch, breathing him in, the rhythm of us sinking in something deeper than just touch. Then his fingers brushed the scar on my right hip. Everything changed. A pulse of light shimmered beneath his touch, soft, silvery, alive. He froze, still as stone. His breath caught, his chest pressing into mine as he leaned back just enough to see it.
What's that, Starlight?
His voice was low, a rasp, not angry, not afraid, just shaken. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding. It's always been there, I whispered. My mom said it was a gift from the moon goddess. His gaze didn't leave it. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Didn't ask more, didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand settle over the scar like he was grounding himself, like if he held it gently enough, it might tell him something the world hadn't. Then he looked at me, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with something quieter. Then he pushed again, not rough, but deeper, needier, like something in him had cracked open. Kael, I breathed, barely able to get his name past the ache in my throat. He didn't answer. His mouth found mine. The world narrowed to us. His heartbeat, my scar's pulse, the shared pain of our pasts, a song only we could sing. Until exhaustion claimed us, leaving us tangled, breathless in the lantern's fading glow. We lay there, his arm around me, the blanket pulled back over us, its warmth a cocoon against the night. The cedar and leather scent of him wrapped me tight, but Nora's plea and Tessa's shadow lingered, a quiet crack in the bond we forged. I knew I couldn't stay torn forever, but in that moment, with Kael's love anchoring me, I let myself believe we could face the world together, our scars a map to something new. I shouldn't have lingered, I knew that, but dawn had crept over Willow Creek, painting the frost-kissed pines in a pale glow, and my feet refused to move from Kael's bed, where the air bit my skin. The morning stretched quiet, the compound stirring with the clatter of boots and the low growl of wolves on patrol, but my heart roared louder, caught in the echo of last night. Kael's lips on mine, his hands tearing my hoodie, the lantern's glow fading as exhaustion claimed us. It burned brighter than the sunrise. My scar, that crescent on my right hip, pulsed a restless heat that hadn't quieted, like it knew the truth I couldn't face. I loved him, and it terrified me. I stood at the kitchen counter, rolling biscuit dough with sore arms and aching thighs. Kael's touch still humming through me like a secret, Every shift of my hips brought a flush to my cheeks. Last night hadn't left me. Nora had been silent, her eyes avoiding mine as she chopped thyme, her braid tight like her mood.
You decide?
She'd asked finally, her voice sharp, cutting through the kitchen's hum. Not yet, I'd said, keeping my eyes on the dough.
Kael, he is not what you think.
She'd scoffed, her knife pausing.
He's an alpha, Arya. They break things, even if they don't mean to.
I'd wanted to argue, to tell her about his warmth, his scars, but I'd stayed quiet, her words settling heavy. The day had dragged, chores blurring into each other, and I'd caught glimpses of Kael, checking patrols, his coat flapping in the wind, his eyes finding mine across the yard. Each look had been a tether, pulling me back to him. When night settled in, I sat near the firelight of the slave tent, the air thick with smoke and murmured exhaustion. The mark on my hip sparkled, flaring like it sensed him before I did. It started with heat, a pulse beneath my skin. It lit up like a flare before he even stepped into the circle of firelight, before he even said my name.
Starlight.
Just one word, and every damn bone in me turned to glass. My gaze shot up, and Kael was there, towering. Still, like he didn't belong to the earth we walked on but to something older, wilder. Every wolf seated near the fire snapped to attention. You could feel the shift, respect, maybe fear. But I wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore.
Come with me.
His voice didn't ask. It was soft but certain, like the night itself had whispered me into his arms. He reached for me. No command, just fingers stretched open, waiting. And I didn't even hesitate. His hand closed around mine, warm and steady, and he led me out of the tent. The silence behind us folded like paper. I didn't know where we were going. But somehow I did. We crossed the dirt path into the heart of the fortress. The tall gates creaked open like they knew who was coming. The guard wolves didn't speak, just stepped aside. He took me through the stone halls without a word, just the sound of our footsteps echoing off marble and memory. I had never been inside this far, never belonged to this part of the world. And then he opened the door of a chamber just beside his own. The room was luxurious. There were furs draped across the bed, books stacked in corners, and weapons lined in an almost reverent display. The fireplace crackled gold against the polished wood floors. The scent of cedar, ash, and kaol wrapped around everything. I didn't mean to whisper it, but it slipped out anyway. It's beautiful. I turned, heart still thudding behind my ribs, and he was standing by the door. Arms crossed, jaw tight, like he was holding something in. He didn't answer, just gave me this slow, quiet smile that made my chest ache in places I didn't know existed. Thank you, I said, voice softer now. Really?
You deserve it.
He replied, simple, final. And I swear, I almost cried right then. Because no one had ever said that to me before. Not after my family died.
You're not going back to the tents.
He added.
Not ever.
My throat tightened.
You'll live here now. You'll help manage the pack's affairs. You're no more a slave, Arya.
I nodded once, trying to hold it together. But something cracked inside, a dam I hadn't even realized was holding everything back. I walked toward the fire, sat on the rug and pulled the fur throw over my legs. He joined me, slowly, sitting close. His thigh brushed mine and the warmth of it spread through me like wildfire. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thick with all the things we weren't saying. My fingers played with the edge of the blanket. You didn't have to do this,
I did.
he said.
Because I love you, Starlight.
I looked at him then. Really looked. His hand came to rest lightly on my knee. Warm, grounding. I leaned my head on his shoulder. Quietly. He didn't say a word. He just laid his hand over mine, lacing our fingers together. And we stayed like that, two people who didn't know how to love each other, but who were trying anyway. Morning broke with a strange weight in the air. Thick, electric. Like the sky was holding its breath. The fire in Kael's room had long gone to embers, but the mark on my hip pulsed like a second heartbeat, sharp and insistent. Not sparkling like it did when I was around him. No, today it burned. Not in a way that warmed it. It hurt. Kael stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest, shirt clinging to the tension in his back.
Talon's arriving by noon. He's the alpha of the Eastern Ridge. Has his own territory, but things have been shifting.
I watched his jaw clench, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the windowsill. The unease rolling off him wasn't subtle. It was a storm humming under his skin. What kind of shifting? I asked softly. He turned finally, eyes flicking to mine, voice tight.
The kind that makes old alliances start to creak.
I nodded, but the ache in my hip didn't ease. I pressed my palm to it, grounding myself in the pain. My body had been warning me before my brain could catch up lately. That mark, it knew things. It felt things before I did. By the time the sun dragged itself across the sky and dipped toward the trees, my nerves were stretched thin. I couldn't sit still. Every corner of the fortress buzzed with movement, but none of it calmed me. I found myself pacing Kael's study, watching the shadows stretch longer through the slats of the windows. Then I felt him. Not Kael, someone else. Something colder. Kael had asked me not to busy myself with chores meant for maids, but my mind couldn't sit still. I needed to see him. Talon. I needed to see him. Tally. I grabbed a silver tray and 2 glasses, filling them with amber whiskey, Kael's usual, and let my feet carry me, almost without thought, toward his chambers. I didn't knock. I stepped in, and the heat of the fire met me first, followed by the scent of pine smoke, sweat, and something unfamiliar. Cloth and iron. Kael stood near the hearth, shoulder to shoulder with a man I didn't recognize, but my mark knew him before my mind did. Talon. His hair was jet black, swept back like wind had tried and failed to touch him. His eyes were too pale, wolf pale, almost silver, and when they landed on me, they didn't just look, they took. Alpha, I murmured, offering the tray with a dip of my chin. My voice came out steadier than I felt, though my hands were trembling just enough to make the ice clink in the glasses. Kael's eyes narrowed. Talon's lips curled.
And who might you be?
She's not serving.
Kael said flatly, stepping between us like a shield. But not before Talon's hand brushed mine when he took the glass. Just a second too long. A whisper of contact, and my entire spine tense. That touch, it wasn't just cold, it was wrong. Something inside me recoiled, my mark searing like someone had pressed hot iron to my skin. I stepped back so fast I nearly stumbled. Kael caught me, hand around my elbow, steadying.
Starlight, go. Now.
I didn't argue. I turned and left, my heart galloping like it was trying to outrun whatever Talon had stirred inside me. Later that night, Kael found me in the hallway outside his room. I wasn't eavesdropping, at least not consciously, but I couldn't sleep. That touch, that stare, it stuck to me like oil I couldn't wash off.
That were you thinking?
His voice was low but sharp, the kind that stings more because it's careful. I didn't plan to. I started.
You're not a maid.
He snapped.
I told you that.
I know, I snapped back, surprising even myself. But I felt it, Kael. I had to see him. My mark. He's dangerous. Kael ran a hand through his hair, tension rippling off him in waves.
I know. I feel it too.
He leaned against the wall, jaw set like stone. For a minute, neither of us spoke.
He doesn't have much of a pack.
He said finally.
His numbers are low and his territory's crumbling. If it comes to war, we'll win.
At what cost? I whispered. He looked at me then, really looked, like he saw every thought behind my eyes. If it comes to that, I'll protect you first. My heart twisted. I don't need protection, I murmured.
I know you're powerful, Starlight.
He said quietly, stepping closer.
Then I won't walk away from my duty, even if you want me to.
There was a silence between us then, not empty but full of every unsaid thing. The fire behind him crackled, casting flickers of gold across his face. His hand brushed mine, barely touching. The moment stretched, long and quiet. I trained when the moon was high, when the world was quiet and the wind didn't carry Kael's scent. The clearing behind the east wall was hidden by a tangle of thorn bush and pine. I'd spent weeks there, bruising my arms, ripping my palms, pushing the wildness inside me to the surface until it listened. I wasn't just a girl with a mark anymore. Something was terribly wrong with Talon. The moment his hand touched mine, my mark flared like it was trying to warn me. It hadn't stopped burning since. I was learning how to move with it, call on it, make it mine. Tonight the air was thick with summer heat, sticky and still. My breath fogged as I crouched low, watching the way light bent around my hand when I called the energy forward. A soft blue shimmer ghosted my fingertips, like moonlight underwater. I didn't hear Kael coming. His voice was low, a little amused, a little too close.
You've been sneaking off every night.
He said, stepping through the brush like it wasn't even there.
You think I wouldn't notice?
I spun around, my chest heaved from more than the training. His eyes tracked the way I stood, shoulders tense, knees braced, like I wasn't sure whether to defend myself or run. He looked at me like I was a riddle he'd started solving and couldn't stop. I didn't want to waste your time, I muttered, brushing dirt off my knees. You've got enough to worry about. Kael stepped into the moonlight, his jaw clenched. He was wearing a black shirt that clung to his chest, sleeves rolled up, arms folded.
My time is yours, Starlight.
That made me look up. He took a breath, slow, careful.
I watched you for 10 minutes before I said anything.
He said.
You were focused, controlled, powerful, like you've always belonged in the middle of the storm.
I swallowed hard. My mark pulsed, slow and hot against my hip. I don't know what I'm becoming, I whispered. He stepped closer.
We will figure it out together.
The tension snapped tight between us like an arrow drawn back too far. His fingers brushed the side of my face, dirt and sweat and all. The gesture was so simple, so heartbreakingly tender. I nearly broke. His thumb lingered near the corner of my mouth, like he was trying to memorize the shape of my silence.
I'm announcing our bond tomorrow.
He said, voice barely above a whisper.
Who be my Luna?
My lips parted. You're sure? Kael's laugh was low, almost bitter.
I've been sure since the night you threw yourself in front of my patrol, risked everything just to save me. You're mine, Arya.
I didn't speak. I couldn't. But I didn't pull away either. The next night, Willow Creek was aglow with firelight. The pack gathered near the edge of the river, where the trees bowed and the moon turned the water silver. Lanterns dangled from every branch, swaying gently in the wind like fireflies. My dress was deep forest green, simple but soft, tied at the waist with a leather belt Kael had left on my bed. He didn't say a word about it, just left it there like a quiet promise. He found me near the edge of the celebration, watching the others dance, laugh, drink from cups carved out of bone and silver.
You're standing too still.
He said behind me.
I can feel your heartbeat from here.
He offered his hand. My fingers trembled as I reached for his. When I placed my hand in his, he pulled me forward into the clearing, the firelight wrapping around us like a second skin. The crowd went quiet. The music softened. Kay lifted my hand in his, then turned to face the pack.
She is no slave.
He said, loud enough for every wolf in every corner to hear.
That never was. From now on, Arya walks beside me. She will be Luna of this pack.
Some wolves cheered, howling into the night sky. Others stood still, stiff, unsure. But I saw the truth in his eyes. I felt it in the way his hand stayed around mine, steady, grounding me even when the world tipped sideways. He pulled me into his arms. We danced. Slow and quiet at first, our steps more like swaying than anything structured. His hand was firm at my back, mine curled near his collarbone. His skin was warm through the fabric of his shirt, and I could feel every restrained heartbeat between us.
You don't have to keep proving yourself, Arya.
He murmured, his forehead resting lightly against mine. I'm not proving anything, I whispered back. Kael's breath hitched. His lips barely grazed my temple.
I see you.
3 words that wrapped around every fracture in my chest and held it together. For a few moments we just stood like that, bodies close, breath mingling, the heat between us humming like a wildfire beneath our skin. Sometimes it wakes. Some nights drag, heavy and slow like fog clinging to the earth. Others pass in a blur, like breath on glass. Brief, warm, and gone before you even notice. These days with Kael, they blurred. He was quieter now, softer with me, still ruthless with his pack, still the storm they followed without question, but with me he became something else, a quieter wild, a man who remembered how to feel. And I could feel it too, in the way he brushed hair from my cheek like it was sacred. In how he always poured my tea just how I liked it, 2 spoons of honey, no milk. In how he'd leave me a blanket when he worked late and I fell asleep curled in the chair. I was still trying to believe I deserved it. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting a silver sheen over the corridor floors as I padded barefoot past Kael's chamber. My fingers brushed the stone wall, cool and familiar under my skin. The fortress was unusually quiet, too quiet, and something about the air felt off, like a storm was coming, or already here. Then I heard it. Voices. I paused, my breath catching mid-step.
Kael, this is reckless.
Elder Marcus said, his voice sharp, like brittle wood snapping in the cold.
You think moving her into the fortress and announcing an engagement will be enough to shield her?
Kael's voice came low, rough and exhausted.
I am protecting her, Marcus, long before you ever told me to.
And marry her.
Marcus snapped.
Now, before the prophecy unfolds any further.
I leaned into the wall, every nerve in my body on edge. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. There was silence for a beat. Then Kael spoke, quieter this time, almost like a confession.
We will marry soon.
The words hit harder than they should have. Marcus sighed.
Fate's already chosen her. You know what that mark means. You saw her mark, didn't you?
His voice had an edge to it, sharp, almost accusing.
How do you know?
Kael asked, startled.
That's not the point.
Marcus snapped.
What matters is her powers waking up, with or without you. And if any other alpha even gets a hint of it.
No one will touch her.
Kael growled.
I'll make damn sure they're dead before anyone lays another finger on her.
The air around me grew thick. My mark pulsed, stinging with a strange heat. That same low throb in my hip, like it recognized the weight of those words.
I saw it.
Marcus continued, his voice low.
A fission. Blood. Fire. Her standing in the middle of it all, glowing like the moon itself. The prophecy is no longer some far-off tale. It's here.
I stumbled back, heart hammering like thunder in my ears. My palm hit the cold stone behind me as I tried to steady my breath. The world spun, not from fear, but from the weight of truth finally pressing down like a storm cloud ready to burst. I was the prophecy. Marcus had warned me earlier, but no one in my pack knew. Not my mom, not my dad, not Caleb, not even me. We always thought it was a gift from Moon Goddess. I turned to leave, the corridor spinning with shadows and questions, but as I stepped around the bend, I froze. He was there. Kael. His eyes were already on me, as if he'd known I'd be standing there all along. He didn't look surprised, just tired and sad, like a man trying to outrun the tide with nothing but his bare hands.
You heard, huh?
He said simply. I nodded. I did. A beat passed. The only sound was my pulse, loud in my ears. I'm not just your starlight anymore, am I? I whispered. I'm a piece of fate now. He looked at me then, really looked, like I was breaking his heart just by standing in front of him. And maybe I was.
You're both.
He said finally.
They're mine. And you're more.
Something in his voice cracked open the dam inside me. I didn't realize I was crying until he stepped forward and gently cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing a tear away. That small touch, barely there, set my skin on fire. I leaned into him, forehead to chest, breathing him in like he was the only real thing in the world.
They're the reason I'm still breathing.
He murmured. His arms wrapped around me, strong and grounding. My fingers clutched at his tunic, needing something to hold on to, because everything else felt like it might slip away. We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in silence, wrapped in each other. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like it knew what was coming. The fortress buzzed quietly that evening, humming with the leftovers of the lunar festival. Wolves were slow and sleepy. Laughter had faded into murmurs, footsteps into silence. Kael had been up late dealing with pack disputes, and I'd slipped away to draw a bath. I needed the quiet, the heat, time to think. My room, if I could even call it that now, was warm and dimly lit, soft light flickering from the sconces lining the stone walls. I'd lit a candle by the tub and sunk in, water lapping at my collarbones, steam curling around me like smoke. I let myself breathe, just for a while. By the time I stepped out, the towel clinging to my damp skin, I felt calm, almost human again. Until I saw him, Talon, standing in my room like he belonged there, my blood iced, my breath caught. His eyes slid over me, slow, greedy, not with lust, with control, with power. And I realized I'd walked into a trap wearing nothing but a towel. What are you doing here? My voice was sharp, slicing through the silence. He took a step closer, arms loose at his sides, like he wasn't the threat he clearly was.
Admiring the view?
He drawled. I grabbed the doorknob. Kael. The words ripped from my throat, raw and desperate. I yanked the door, but it didn't budge. Talon chuckled, a low, poisonous sound.
No use, sweetheart. My soldiers made sure everyone sleeps deep tonight, including your alpha.
He said it like a joke, like a goddamn bedtime story. My spine went cold. What did you do to them? My grip tightened on the towel. His smirk deepened, eyes gleaming with something sick and smug.
Let's just say, no one's waking up before sunrise.
He took another step. I backed up. The stone floor bit into my bare feet. Don't touch me, I said. But he reached out anyway. His fingers skimmed the edge of my collarbone. Slow, testing, like I was something he already owned. I jerked away, my skin crawling. Talon didn't flinch. Didn't even look surprised, just amused.
Still feisty.
He murmured, like he was commenting on the weather.
Kael's little lunar.
I'll rip your throat out, I snapped, my wolf growling beneath the surface.
You can try.
He said. Then he leaned in, too close. I didn't understand, until my vision blurred. My head spun. He'd done something. Something to the air, or to me. My limbs felt heavy. My heart pounded like it was trying to fight for me, even when my body was losing the battle. Kael will not spare you, I breathed, stumbling back. Talon caught my hips before I could fall. His grip was tight, too tight. I looked at him then, not just with fear. You won't win, I spat. He leaned closer, lips by my ear.
I already am.
That was the last thing I heard before the world tilted and everything went black. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It sank into my skin, crawled through the fibers of my soaked towel, and made a home in my bones. My head throbbed, dull and steady, like the beat of a distant war drum, and when I tried to move, pain spiked up my shoulders. My wrists were raw, bound above my head with iron shackles that bit into my skin like they had teeth of their own. My ankles were chained too, spread, heavy, like I was part of the damn gate behind me. A dungeon. Stone walls, cracked and damp. A flickering torch in the corner, spitting shadows like they were secrets. The air reeked of mildew, rust, and something else. Something feral. I tugged at the chains, weakly at first, then harder. Panic had a way of lighting fires inside you that no logic could put out. Then I heard it, boots on stone. Measured, confident. That sick kind of calm that made my stomach turn. Talon.
You're awake, sweetheart.
His voice slithered into the room like oil, smooth and heavy. He stepped into the light, black shirt unbuttoned at the throat, sleeves rolled up, his jaw shadowed like he hadn't slept. He looked too clean for a dungeon, too composed for someone who'd slipped past every guard just to get to me. I glared. Where am I? He didn't answer, just walked closer, until his chest brushed mine. I flinched. His thumb grazed the edge of my lower lip. The touch was feather light but felt like a burn.
I'm not gonna hurt you, Arya.
He said, voice soft like that made it better.
You have no idea how important you are.
I swear to God, I spat, if you don't back up. And to my shock, he listened. He stepped back immediately. The door creaked open behind him, and a soldier stepped in, head bowed.
Alpha Talon, Kael and his pack, they're searching for her.
Talon looked at me and smiled, that kind of smile you want to slap off someone's face.
Let them search. They won't find her.
My heart jumped. I yanked at the chains again. Why am I here? He tilted his head, stepping back just enough to study me.
Because I need your help.
Help with what?
You'll know soon enough.
He turned to leave, the heavy door groaning behind him. You're a coward, I shouted after him. Taking me like this, what the hell kind of alpha are you? He paused in the doorway, spine straight, hands relaxed at his sides like my words didn't touch him.
I'm the kind that does what needs to be done.
And then he was gone. The silence he left behind wasn't quiet. It screamed. It pressed in around me, thick and choking, like the air itself had given up. I sagged against the chains. Every inch of my body ached. my shoulders from hanging, my throat from shouting, my chest from the weight of regret. Tears gathered, hot and fast, sliding down my cheeks as I stared at the empty torchlight. I didn't sob, I didn't scream again. I just stayed still, letting the cold crawl in, because if I moved I might break. And if I broke, I didn't know if I'd come back together the same.